Welcome back to the Narrator Roundtable. I'm Gail Shalan, and joining me today, we have Deanna Anthony. How you doing, Deanna?
Hello.
And we've got André Santana. What's going on, André?
Hey from Alaska. I'm not in Alaska. I don't know why I said that, but hi.
We'd go with you. We'd just roll with it.
Fly. Fly. You mean acting? Oh.
Acting, exactly. Professionalized, yes. Alrighty. So I have a little story for you all. When I was a kid, I was that kid, and maybe some of you were as well, who would go to the library and get out those giant plastic containers full of cassettes and CDs of audiobooks. And I would listen for hours and hours. But I'll admit that when I first started narrating audiobooks, I didn't really understand that this was something that people did to, say, make a living. And despite the many hours of one-on-one time that I spent with narrators like Stina Nielsen, Rebecca Soler, Jim Dale, Julia Whalen, Brian Jakes, I really never stopped to think, who are these people? What do they do with their lives? Do they even have a life outside of this book? Probably not. They live inside my Walkman, right? Maybe they don't even have a body. Wait, if they have a body, what do they look like? The identity of the narrator remained a total mystery to me. Except if maybe I listened to them many times, and then maybe I'd kind of remember who they were and listen to another book that they did. So flash forward to 2017 or so, when I did finally figure out that these marvelously talented voices were in fact attached to a body and a face, the body and face of an actor. And I, a young actor, eager to work with my voice, had started to focus on building a career as a narrator. And then the COVID-19 pandemic hit, forcing all of us who were doing this to work from home. It also forced us to connect through our devices if we wanted any human contact outside of our little bubbles. And the audiobook industry started to go through all sorts of changes. We did all have some home studio set up of some variety. We continued to work remote. We were soon expected to keep doing so after we came back to real life. And then the SAG strike hit, and more actors started narrating from home, including some big name and maybe slightly less big name TV and film actors who found themselves in our midst because that was the work to be had. And we were forced to connect still socially and commercially in this new way. The social media influencer was born. OPTok and Bookstagram took off. This wildly affected the indie publishing market. Live narration became a trend. It's still so much a trend to this day. And the presence and the face of the narrator, the name connected to the voice that you were hearing, continued to grow in prominence. I don't know if anybody's heard of the Alexander app, but their entire marketing ploy is that they offer recognizable, famous narrators only on their platform. Some narrators that we know and love started to go viral on these platforms. So for narrators, it started to pull an emphasis to the fact that who we were, building a following, building a name, was much more important. Visibility started to feel much more important. Associating our faces and our names with our voices started to feel so much more important. Or was it? I mean, our names still are not on the cover of most audiobooks. Sometimes when we're in full cast, our names are not credited on the audiobooks, in the listing, in the reviews. We're often not tagged in the marketing materials. So what really matters in regards to how well known we are, and how well do we actually know each other through these virtual avenues of reality? So today I've invited a rock star narrator to join us for this discussion, whom I first connected with in the virtual space, having listened to his work but not knowing him as a person. And now I feel lucky enough to call him a good friend. With over a decade of experience in audiobooks, our guest is no stranger to the ever-shifting seas of narratorhood. An Earphones Award-winning, Sobus Award-winning, and Audie-nominated narrator of over 500 titles, most prominently in GameLit and Litvic, Neil Hellegers works nearly everywhere across the publisher, producer, and author indie spaces. He ventured successfully into the live narration space, streaming regular lives for Podium Audio and others, garnering a TikTok following of over 12,000 with his Shakespearean readings in OP, an extinct Elizabethan accent. He is also the host of the Adrenaline podcast from Realm Media, has appeared in numerous network television shows, feature films, theater productions, commercials, and is a seasoned educator. I found myself in conversation with Neil on many occasions regarding these questions about being seen or not being seen, but simply heard. And I think that he's going to bring such a well-seasoned, well-rounded perspective to this conversation. Welcome, Neil. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate all that you said very much, and that's it's hard to admit that it's all true, but I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to be. We circled around a bit as to like what to talk about here, and I think for the moment that we're living through, there's this what we call the parasocial element. Yeah. I feel like has got so many different threads out into everything that we do, and so I'm excited to talk about it with you guys.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, right, exactly. Like we're looking at the kaleidoscope tonight of all of the different aspects of that parasocial connection. So speaking of which, I did a little dive into articles written about parasocial connection because it is so prominent for so many of our lives right now. And in Time magazine, in the health and mental health section, Andrew D. Johnson wrote an article in defense of parasocial relationships. And he was asserting that parasocial relationships form an identity and develop autonomy. By imagining relationships and associating emotions with people at a distance, we have a safe forum to experiment with different ways of being. And he also concluded from research that the parasocial relationships can help people with low self-esteem feel more confident, become closer to their ideal self. And it got me thinking, is that not to some degree what occurs between a listener and the main character of the audiobook or the narrator, capital N, of the audiobook? It's like hours of intimate one-sided sharing and one-sided connection that make the listener feel seen or heard or like they belong. And so I guess my question for all three of you is, when we add that third identity in of being known, you, André, you, Deanna, you, Neil, as an additional character in this story, what does that do to this previously, I guess I feel like somewhat sacred space of that parasocial relationship to some degree?
It was like such an interesting way to conceptualize it, because on one hand, like if I really stop and think about it, like over the past month and a half, I've spent probably 50 hours with Jeff Hayes in my ear. I'm listening to the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. And I have a vision of like who he is as an actor now. I have a sense of this character that he's been playing across these books. And I think that like this is what we do with media. We watch movies, we watch TV shows, we read books, and we connect with characters. We go out and write fan fiction. Like we do build these relationships because I think for a lot of people, media is the way that we find healing in the world. We find these lessons that the real people in our lives did not give us. And so there's this sense of like connection to the material. And I do feel like there's a certain degree of this reality in the social media world that like, yes, like that ability to connect with someone who is not necessarily actually in conversation with you extends to social media, extends to influencers, extends to the narrators in your ear. And I think it has to exist in the context of like the fact that because that person is not in conversation with you, you do not actually have a relationship with them. You have a relationship with this idea of them. Walking up to Jeff Hayes, I have not earned like the intimacy of being of interacting with him as if I know him, right? Mm-hmm. And so it feels like when you cross that line, you come into complicated spaces. And I do feel like the history of like Hollywood stalkers, of like all these different things can really truly be across that line.
Yeah, that split that you're talking about, including celebrating the work of that person and how their work represents who they are and how you receive them as a person. But as on one end, I think the very positive aspect of what we're talking about, but also, as you say, the dark side of it, or the other end of it, or another aspect of it as well too. I think it's a real testament to the efficacy and expressive power of what we do as audiobook narrators, right, that those relationships can be formed through just voice, through whatever that person happens to be doing at the time, whatever they're at the gym, they're walking around, they're listening on their home, whatever, or in their car, whatever it might be, that you spend those hours with someone who is and you feel like they're in conversation with you. You feel like you're talking with them. And I feel like I think it bleeds into why celebrities are attractive to audiobook producers, because they come preloaded with that parasocial relationship. You've seen Andrew Garfield in X number of movies. You take that relationship into 1984 and that informs it, or Andrew Scott or whoever else is in there as well too. So I can see why that is an advantage, as even if they're not known for a narrator, they're known to the listener. And that's often why that book might be like, why again, do another version of 1984. If you're not going to populate it with people that people are attracted to or relate to or want to see do excellent work. I think Andrew Scott is an amazing actor. I've listened to that 1984, but I would just for him, even if I have no real desire to listen to 1984 again, even though, again, relative to the moment, very important. And I think it starts to tie into things like narrator replacements. Why they're so jarring for people is because they've spent tens or imagine if Jeff Hayes was replaced, which would never happen. But if just what would replace the game lit world would implode, fold in on itself, and form a new black hole. And I say that kind of jokingly, even though I've been on both ends of that exchange as well too, and I can see with the vehemence that people respond to, and I totally get it, because their entire understanding of this universe you've been building for them is locked into that very personal expression of that one person, which is a wonderful thing. But it's really hard when that gets disrupted and you see the result of it. It's very powerful in all these different ways, and for good or for ill, you know.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing to weigh in terms of like, I guess the spotlight and where fandom sits when maybe less householdy names are being replaced by bigger names in audiobooks, but there's a fan base for the book or for the author, and suddenly the voice in their ear is being changed. Like, I'm so curious about the process would be to evaluate whether that's a smart decision or not in that situation. But it's true that there's these really, and you know this working in the gamelet space, these super fandoms that even if they're not household names to the general public, these narrators who occupy these specific author stories are like the person, they're the voice for that project. So it's an interesting, thing to think about.
I mean, this actual question is the intersection of publishing and entertainment. That is exactly what it is, right? It generates sales, which generates more work. So it could be problematic. Do you know what I mean? Because even if someone is a celebrity, by whatever scale they're given that name, they're still a person. They're still human. So as a fan, I may be upset when the voice that comforts me is replaced by someone I don't know, first off, someone whose voice timbre or their pacing triggers something negative in me from a past experience. So I don't like that narrator, which has no bearing on whether that narrator was the right choice to be a replacement or whether they're talented. But you know, through the lens of what I have going on personally and using the universal you of what the expectations are that are already laid forth before the new book in the series comes out, or, you know, the new title from the author. Sometimes I think that the publishing industry is being driven by that, just as the entertainment industry has been driven by that for years, as opposed to maybe say how Audible started, right? Where people were signed on and they did the books that were assigned to them, much like the studio system in Hollywood.
Right.
People were employees and they worked on what they were told to work on. And that's just not the way any of it works anymore. So the thing that's kind of funny is like, André was talking about celebrity. I've been very fortunate, like on stage, to work with people who are known celebrities. And the funny thing is that they kind of fit. I mean, there's hybrids, of course, but they kind of fit in two veins. There's people who really need the security most of the time of that celebrity to have time for themselves and to set themselves apart. So you would interact with them differently or not based on what they need. And then the other side that I found really refreshing was the, you know, don't meet your heroes kind of thing. It was the opposite of that, where they just wanted to be treated like people. And so when I was in New York full time, one of the things that kind of became almost like a tip of respect for someone that you did not know it was totally fine for you to approach them and say, thank you for your work. I enjoy your work so much and I appreciate you. And I just wanted you to know that, as opposed to asking them for an autograph or now a photo. No, they don't want to take a photo with you. And it is an obligation. I don't care who it is. So it's just kind of one of those things. If you haven't made a touch point, you do have to kind of step back and kind of decide for yourself if you're ready for whatever the reaction is going to be of the celebrity, whether they're on stage, screen, or on the mic. Because that's the great thing about literature. And now we have this medium of audiobooks where sometimes that's the only way people are reading is right. That, you know, with the imagination, I mean, it's not just entertainment. Sometimes it's educational. So I don't think you can really eliminate the importance of that for the sake of celebrity.
Yeah. And you bring up a really good point in terms of when the relationship shifts from parasocial to actual social connection, to leave the expectations at the door of the precedent that's been set because you've had a one-way mirror into this really intimate performance, not to be fooled that is that person. And that makes me even think about our relationships with each other and the incredibly parasocial connection that we initially develop with our entire industry being virtual and online, that you may finally meet somebody at, like, say, APAC, with who you've been connected to for maybe 5, 6, 7 years at this point. And it might feel like you know them, but like to leave the grace and the space of, oh, I've actually never met this person. I've listened to their work. I've seen what they post in this group, but I don't really know them. Yeah.
I can agree with that. And also the whole thing of, you could parallel that to, I don't know, dating, right? Because like online dating works for some people and for some people it doesn't. It's like, no, I need to meet you. Like, I need to spend time with you. Like, some people are able to do long distance relationships in stints or for long periods. And some people absolutely cannot. It just destroys the whole foundation of what they need a relationship to be. And so what you're saying is very interesting because it was a very finite kind of compounded time where you could become very intimate with people in this industry very quickly because we all were kind of in the same pool and we all had this time to really invest into one another. And I would imagine that it would be kind of easy to be able to step up to someone the first time you've met them when you've literally listened to every Clubhouse, to every YouTube, you were on Discord. Do you know what I mean? You were doing all of the things and you feel like you know them and they're like, but no, you don't.
So that's a question I have for Neil then with all your experience doing lives in spaces like Discord and on TikTok, with your experience of creating content. And I feel like, André, you do this as well with the content creation. Like, how much of you are you showing up with to these spaces? Do you know what I mean?
I think I started doing TikTok in general because the development. Okay, just to back up for a second, something that Deanna was saying about how because I guess I feel like I've seen. I feel like my career sits on the sort of the joints of all these different aspects of the way audiobook has worked and the way that social media didn't exist and that it kind of how it came into itself, how the indie sphere is so much bigger and more prevalent in audiobook than it ever was before. And that the growth of knowing that person in some way, not in opposition to whatever work that you might be doing, but as a complement to whatever they're doing. I started doing TikToks as like a way of, because it was important. This is sort of an early AI thing, really, that we needed to be human beings and that we need to demonstrate that there's a human being with a full creative spirit behind the audiobook that you might be listening to. Though I kind of like, I got bored with that sort of quickly because I was doing, other kind of narrator content like Day in the Life of an Audiobook Narrator. And I always try to be like, I'll put my little spin on it. Like I'm walking through the park and then I'm attacked by zombies, stuff like that. But, and then I kind of fell off with it. And then, I started doing Shakespeare content because that was what was important to me. Now, it's got nothing much to do with narration directly, but I always thought it would be a body of work that was up there that would be a supplement to whatever. If you happen to listen to me doing audiobooks, you might be like, oh, well, he also has this pedigree in Shakespeare, whether that's self-marketing or whether that's just me satisfying a creative urge that I have and utilizing this outlet when my work is all in this small room and not on stage doing Shakespeare, that I could still be doing Shakespeare, that I could still be doing Hamlet, even though no one's going to cast me as Hamlet directly. You know, I mean, I guess there's some weird ass production that might happen, but very likely not. So that I could still be doing all that work in monologues and enriching myself and therefore enriching my life as an actor. And in some ways relating to maybe other Shakespeare creators, which I did a lot of as well too. Kind of coining OPTok, you know, which is not really a thing, but the hashtag shows up. And along with the entire trend of own voices that developed alongside publishing over the course of the 10, 12 years that I've been doing this, about how every narrator's personal being was suddenly a lot more important in how that work was presented to the public, on how it was received, how it could be received, about how all of a sudden conventions that were sort of ignored became discarded in terms of representation, in terms, but at the same time, while you can now be witness to that person directly on social media, it also became this simultaneous of you're getting to know this person, but again, are you really getting to know this person? Are you getting to know the persona that they put forth? And I think it's vital, and it's been a wonderful thing to sort of see that transition happen from along with the also the growth of the indie sphere and things like that, particularly in Gamelit, but also in romance. I think those are the sort of two areas that have their entire fandom is more or less contained within the genre. Gamelit people mostly listen to only Gamelit. Romance people listen to mostly only Gamelit. Not exclusively, of course, but there's a lot of that kind of happening. So their understanding of what happens is pared down to where do they get their suggestions from. If Gamelit, for example, lives in Facebook, it does not really live. I mean, to a certain extent, it's in Discord. To a certain extent, not really. It's on TikTok. But it really, in terms of the forums and the conversations that are had, a little bit on Reddit. There's a big Reddit group for Gamelit, but it's mostly on Facebook. So within those groups, if people are recommending a certain book, the echo effect tends to happen tremendously. And how that relates to narrators, because like romance, Gamelit fans really are attached to their narrators. And so that connection, that social connection, because those narrators are involved, you know, but it's always this weird in between of like, I can't just be another dude talking about this book or this other thing, but can't I? Like, why can't I? And so I'm always kind of walking that line between it and because I'm a fan of the genre that I work in. And so I want to talk about things, sure. But it starts to feel like reviewing your friend's audiobooks, you know, like you could, sure. And, you know, no one's going to fault you for it, but for some reason it feels taboo, you know, at the same time. What I'm getting at is that there's this very complicated interplay of persona as perceived, persona as projected. And then there's the work as well too. And I don't think there's no concrete there's no concrete identity. It's all about what that person happens to know you from. And each individual listener, each individual fan, or whatever you want to call it, has their own individual conception of you as they are. And, you know, and there might be some continuity based on how hard you push at those kind of things that you want people to know about you. And invariably you can't control which of your books you're going to listen to, how they're going to respond to it, how they're going to like it, how they're going to hate it. And also worked into that is the work of the author themselves, you know, how their work is received, or not. If there's something about that work that some people have a big objection to, that reflects on the narrator as well too. So, yeah. I don't know what I think what we're getting at was with the addition of all this media and social media and digital media and all of that, it just exponentially increases, the possibilities, really is what it comes down to it. Because, if you have all these different means of connecting to people, there's no limit really. But it's sort of the trade-off for being so ephemeral at the same time. Like, there's a lot to do. There's a lot to behold. And, whereas it's tempting to kind of just want to do the work, we kind of can't do that anymore. Especially if you're working in any kind of prominent way in the industry.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. And I guess that, that brings me back to this question in terms of showing up to perform, I guess is the right verb, like live narration. How do you contain all of that? Because I think for me, it feels a lot easier to step into a private space of a booth with maybe a director and engineer present, but probably just yourself, and let how the audience receive it and not have that in your mind while you're working. But is there not another track that then's like kind of running in the background for you when you are narrating live?
I feel like whenever I narrate live versus not live, I feel like I'm using a complementary overlapping set of muscles. I feel like what I noticed in particular is that whenever I'm narrating live, be it on Discord, just because that's the best way to work on Duet, or if it happens to be on TikTok or whatever, I stop far less often and kind of keep going through. And I always wondered, I never know whether am I doing that because I'm engaging my theater muscles, where the show must go on, and you're trying to create a continuous performance for the sake of the audience that you're now intensely aware of, because they're saying stuff to you while you're trying to work. Or am I alighting the things that I would have stopped in? Maybe, I'm going to try that again. Oh, that didn't quite work so well. Do I not need to stop when I am working offline? Am I stopping
Right.
and starting too much? I don't know. Like, there's no way for me to know which is real, or which is more prevalent. But I just noticed that there is a difference. It's an energy, it's a connection that is different depending on whether I'm being observed or not. It's like Heisenberg uncertainty, right? It's like being observed inherently changes the system that you're in, one way or the other. And it's not for better or for worse. It's just different. And it's fascinating that the work that I do all the time, that I've done, for so long, is so affected immediately by whose eyes I think are on me or not. I have no idea what these people are watching, or if they're actively listening, or what's happening in their lives at that moment. But it's still all of a sudden it's an eyeball that's floating over my head. I know exists, even if I don't know how real that eyeball is. That's a weird thing.
How real are the eyeballs? Yeah.
How real is that floating eyeball?
That's not for us to determine exactly.
No.
Andre, you've done some live narration too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And even I've narrated a couple books live that gave me the permissions to. I feel like a lot of it for me has actually been on the end of just creating video content for the For You page, for my Instagram feed, etc. And it feels, from Neil's description, similar, but also kind of different. It feels like, when you're live, you are going, and it's like you said, everyone gets to watch the process. And I do think there is something fun about showing that process. I think you're right, Neil. There was this whole moment online of see it all happen, see the audiobook get made. And that includes all the kind of here's my blooper reel. Here's how many times I'm going to say the F word, while I'm recording this children's book or whatever it is. But I think when I sit down to make content, there's two things happening in my brain. One is I am always cognizant of who my audience is, whether it is new strangers who are listeners who are showing up and coming in and thinking about what are the implications of them kind of witnessing this moment, right? Because I remember this kind of just a window on TikTok where people were showing these moments of here are the challenges that I have as a human being who narrates, and here's my experiences as a neurodivergent person or so-and-so. And then these comments started rolling in that were don't make us too human, because there's a certain degree of mistakes that we make that might feel unforgivable mistakes that AI would never make, right? Like missing a deadline, or misunderstanding something in an email or something along those lines. So there was this constant thought process. I felt actually the way, and I'll talk about the impact of TikTok on me in a second, but even with the impact of TikTok on me, the way it lives for me the most is on my Facebook, which has been my personal Facebook since I was in middle school, but also just is the Facebook where I, added producers as friends and added a ton of narrators, even many narrators I don't know as friends because I'm on all these different pages. And I am now at a point where even when I love those people, love the producers and other narrators that I'm connected with, they are not part of my day-to-day central life in a way that makes then my personal Facebook feel performative as well. I want to come on and I'm like, ugh, y'all, like today was so messed up, like da 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 da. Like here's this, and this is actually now, I can't grieve into the community that I want to grieve about, for example, right?
That's right,
like,
right, exactly.
So I feel that's one of my long-standing regrets, is having not made like a separate Facebook page, not because I don't love those people, but because it isn't. It essentially becomes this public experience. It is no longer like this internal space. And on TikTok, the big impact for me was actually just having the lens of everyday life shifted into my personal life in a way that was impacting my creativity, in a way that was impacting like my artistic work just beyond audiobooks too. You know, I'm Gen Z, and so there already is a part of me that's like, oh, this moment's happening, like someone pull out a phone, or like we got to take a picture of this, like that kind of thing has always been a dimension of my world. But then this new kind of moment arrived where like I wanted to like write a little piece of flash fiction, and I'm like, oh, I'm a narrator now. I'm going to record this scene and I'm going to post it on TikTok, and it's going to be fun. And then it actually kind of like gets some traction, and then people start following me, and suddenly I'm like, I guess this is the thing people want, so I guess I have to do this again. And then having to go in, and then suddenly I sit down, and every time I write, whether it's for a video or not, my first thought is this going to go viral? Is this going to impact that or this?
Yes.
And it was infesting my like creative world. I'm so grateful it did not get to the point where I felt like I was like changing my audiobook performances because of that. There were moments where I was like, oh, this scene, I'm feeling like this is really fun. I'm just going to hit record. And I'm going to have a recording of this scene, and we're going to go into it. And so maybe I moved my arms a little bit more than I normally do. But thankfully, I don't feel like it impacted that part of my life. But when I wanted to think about writing, when I wanted to like explore some other thing, it felt like it was coming in and influencing all those other parts of my life. And that, I think, was a big reason of why I ultimately left in January, is wanting to like, one, reclaim my doom scrolling time, but two, like reclaim this space. Because really, for me, like, I love the process of like shooting a video and thinking about the concept and like writing something out and executing. Like, I love all the pieces that came into it because I had like taken film classes in college and had a relationship to that process. And suddenly those skills felt like they only existed for content creation. And similarly writing, like I've been doing poetry since I was in middle school, and suddenly those skills, like they felt like they only existed for content creation. So it was this kind of weird space where these people I had never met before, who weren't even necessarily demanding anything of me. I didn't have a lot of followers in the scope of things, but even just, I think for me as who I am as a person, being in that space, like really hit me until I de-influenced myself against TikTok.
You go. That's awesome. Honestly, take it back. Take the space back. I just watched some video today of Dan Levy, like reminding us all that when we are observing on a surface level in social media spaces, people's creative output, it is a very false tip of the iceberg, and it robs us of all of the struggles and strains and pains and boredom and doing nothing of the creative process. It kind of makes us forget that is a part of it for everybody. And I really appreciated that reminder. Deanna, how do you feel about like setting boundaries about your own personal self, your artist self, and your public self that you present as an identity, the celebrity version of you?
Yeah. My celebrity. Oh my God, you can Google me. I've kind of talked about this before in other episodes, but for me, safety is paramount. It is not a given that anyone is a safe space for me, or that any place is a safe space for me. The very first political oriented title I ever did, that WordPress website, it was awful. It was awful what was on there. It's almost like, okay, I got to figure out how I don't see this, because I knew, but I was like, maybe it'll be okay. But no, like on my website, no. That's okay. And it was because I was blogging as well. So I was like, let me just find a way to eliminate that so that I can concentrate to do the work. So as André mentioned before, when I started on Instagram, and I was a late bloomer on all of it. Facebook. I didn't even have MySpace, y'all, and I was working in music full time. I was like, why do I need to do that? Let me just email people. And I got MySpace right before it was replaced, with YouTube and with Facebook. So I have multiple business accounts. Like, if you go onto my personal Facebook, every now and again, I will put something personal, but it's almost all reposts. That's how you get to know me. You get to know what I care about, what I enjoy, what entertains me, the people that I find interesting, because right now for me, Facebook is not a safe place. I don't see anybody who is a family member, a friend, or a narrator colleague who I was like fully engaging with from 2020 to 2023, when that algorithm changed the last time in 2024, everyone disappeared. I physically have to search people out.
Wow.
So I don't even post on Facebook anymore. I go to Instagram and push it to Facebook because I'm like, it's not worth my time to do that. I do Facebook groups. That's when I get into the nitty gritty with people, and that's when I cry with people. And that's when I try to, help people and like just be that space to listen. A lot of my stuff is offline. I will jump on a Zoom in a minute. You know what I mean? So that whole thing of like connecting with people online and only having that online presence, to me, there's a different kind of preciousness to it. Because if you're across the country or across the world, I still can have a meaningful relationship with you with a different kind of meaning, just by taking the time and investing in spending that time with you. And so almost, like I said, I have complete accounts that are nothing but entertainment and publishing.
I think that's part of the moment that we're living in, and how social media has shaped our understanding of current events and politics and things like that too, and how that relates to safety. I think and that's part of the reason why I deferred into Shakespeare, because he always did this thing, and it seemed like the best, safest way to talk about what was happening without talking about exactly what was happening, and letting things kind of speak for themselves in terms of what the artistic expression was. And I think that with the books that we do, there are themes in all of them that I think we would love to be like. The reason why I think this book is important beyond its entertainment value is that it contains a notion about community, or it contains something about individuality being important in the face of conformity, or whatever that predominant theme might be. That's the thing that artistically we pour ourselves into, is the best way to speak to the moment. And that's it's another form of parasocial expression, right?
Right.
Is by putting yourself behind that and having that speak to people without engaging the part of social media that gets really ugly real quick. Like, I stopped posting about politics, and I feel bad about it in some ways, because I find myself shying off a lot of engagement of myself being like, here's how I feel about Israel-Palestine. I have so many opinions about all of that, and if you talk to me for 5 minutes, I'll talk your ear off about it for sure. But I soured a long time ago on for some reason being the one to express all of that. I'll lift and amplify other voices all day long, and that's kind of what I end up doing in those cases. Like I think it was like early on, I spent way too much time arguing with people and accomplishing nothing, to be like, this is a waste of my time and energy. It's not really worth it anymore. And trying to find all the other ways to express what I feel is important in ways that I'd rather reach some Gamelit fan through a predominant theme of the Good Guys, a series that I narrate, than talk to them directly about why tyranny is bad. Like, I mean, on the face of it, few people would say tyranny is good, but if you have a means of expressing artistically what it's about, you utilize the parasocial relationship to reach people in a way that you couldn't if you just said directly to them, hey man, that EO sucks, then they have a backlash to that, as opposed to them loving this series and being fully immersed in it and learning things about our contemporary culture in the same way that Shakespeare talked about his contemporary culture by talking about historical moments in the same way. It's so much more expressive, interesting, pervasive, and lasting a message. than just straight discourse for me, and again, I feel bad about avoiding sometimes what it seems like, oh, he's not commented on this. And there's a big thing about that in social media too. Like, oh, if you've not talked about it, you obviously have this position or that position, depending on who's observing, right? And I feel bad that that's that way, but I don't want to change that, because I don't want that to be how I engage with listeners or with the public. Again, in private, I think Deanna, you're saying this in groups and in certain places and Discord and things like that. I will hold forth, and certainly in person at the bar. God damn it. But on Facebook, no. Maybe Blue Sky. Blue Sky is feeling a little more like
Blue Sky's good. Blue
that.
Sky's good.
I can feel like more comfortable being like, or if it, especially mostly just reposting, or again quoting a line. This is my fucking bag. Sorry, can I curse?
Yeah, you're fine.
Expressing a line of Shakespeare that is relevant to the moment, and just leaving it at that, and not commenting on it. And letting that do the work. Let the art do the work. Let the art that I create do as much work as it took to make that art.
Right. I mean, it brings to mind the fact that like the art form that we are all engaged in and come from is the creative muscle of, like you said, lifting and amplifying another's voice that you embody, or you step into, or you resonate through yourself. And that's what we do as narrators. We lend our voice to this message, and we lift that up. And so like, it also has me wondering about this. I guess sometimes I feel like it's something that I never signed up for, this idea that like suddenly my identity and my thoughts on the matter would be important or relevant, or maybe the determinant between whether or not I get this job over somebody else. Like, it just feels like that is so beside the point sometimes, but I also really understand it. Of course, it makes sense. I don't know, having watched this industry change so much over time, Neil, like how you think that what direction we're headed in, I guess. And if we could talk a little bit about like whether we think that matters, that we're getting the credit, and what the credit should look like, and all that jazz.
I think there's as you said in your introduction, there's still a lot of that has where there's not been progress, down to simple things like names on covers, not being included in the trajectory of it. And even, it's surprising. You see it sometimes with big publishers or producers about, they're like, this book is now available in audiobook, ... And, and people are prompting sometimes in the comments about like, awesome, who narrates it? Cool. But it is more than it ever has been. It's like compared to 12 years ago, it's considerably different. And I guess the trend is that, but then also like there's other winds blowing that I don't know how those are going to affect things. I don't know how the current climate is going to affect own voices. It's funny about own voices. I feel like it was such a hashtag thing 3-4 years ago. Now it's kind of baked in. And I worry about it being baked in so much that it goes stale. See me throwing out metaphors like a motherfucker.
Yeah.
That people are going to gloss over it. I think me too, to a certain extent too. People are like, oh yes, sure. And that I worry about it being taken for granted, mean it's not being as reinforced as it should be.
Yes.
It's like removing parts of the Voter Rights Act because racism's over or whatever, that kind of perspective. Like, we're good now, right? We don't need to focus on this shit.
We did that. We checked that off our list. Right?
Yeah, totally good now. We're totally fine now.
For our audio listeners, Deanna had a good laugh at that one. I feel that like three things are coming up. One with own voices is this kind of back and forth of like the post 2020, like being radical is in, everybody wants to talk about this. Really felt like it showed up in shallow ways in a lot of different spaces. And simultaneously, there was this, my interpretation of it all is that this even kind of like surface level look at diversity and equity in the publishing space also highlighted some realities around demographics. It highlighted how easy and common it was for editors to be able to acquire books from white people, from straight people, from men versus women, depending on the genre that you're in, to the point where we were getting to like recognize that, like, you know, I think recently there was a book published, a children's book, and it's about this Aboriginal character. And as soon as it came out, everyone was like, this is so inaccurate and actually kind of disrespectful. And the writer was not Aboriginal. The writer was white, like, you know, brought in presumably by the publisher to tell this story, the story being this marketable thing in this like kind of era of, like, you know, post 2020 DEI that they were into, but the actual equity of it not being in practice, right? Like the restructuring that is about where money and power and influence are moving, not actually changing. And so, you know, there was this whole thing around like women writing romance between gay men really frequently, gay men not being hired, you know, their books not being put to print. And then in the writing of those books, those women were then cornered to like identify their relationship to queerness and why they were writing those books. And which resulted in like forced outings. It resulted in, you know, all these other things. There was a point on Twitter for the past year and a half where it felt like every other day someone was coming out as having like faked being like trans or like a person of color or something. Like I think there's a reality that is not actually again, girl. Number 6 this year. It's February, and it feels like the reality was that like these things were arriving at a surface level, and because it was the conversation on top of the pre-existing structure, the conversation to people became the structure. People were thinking, oh, the majority of people right now, the only people that can get an editor are people of color. Not the case. The majority of books...
Statistically, actually, it was quite the opposite. Yeah.
Not even close. Not even... Yeah. And this happens in voiceover, too, where because casting directors know where to find white people, they know where to find straight people, the only time the casting call is reaching you is when they need a person of color. And so suddenly your Twitter is 30 calls to only a black voice actor, only, you know, we're only looking for own voices books right now. We're only doing this, this, and this. And when it becomes that part of the conversation, people reorient themselves in it. People pretend to be a certain identity, do all these different things. Mm-hmm. That all, to me, like strikes us back too, as audiobook narrators attached as kind of like visitors into, you know, voice actors coming in to visit the publishing industry, where we want to tell, I'm a person of color and I want to tell stories related to my identity and my background. I also don't want to be exclusively cut into those stories, right? And cornered into those stories. Not just because I have a lot of things to say, but I also suspect that I could not sustain a full career off of only telling black stories, right?
You can't. I can verify that you cannot.
Yeah, I had a friend recently who was just like looking through their Audible and they were like, oh, every cover has a black person on it. I've not done any book that doesn't have a black person on the cover. A black person and then like a lion, right? But like that really impacts us as storytellers.
Deanna's also cracking up, listeners, like, just so you know. She's quiet, but she's cackling.
Not a lion.
But it impacts the opportunities we're able to have. It impacts the, you know, experiences that we're able to bring to listeners. And it impacts the persona that we kind of have to put out into the space, right?
Right, exactly.
Like Neil said, we can't, you know, necessarily always be political in a certain way. I feel like I've seen really clear themes around kind of like a space sets itself up. And there's certain things that are like okay to talk about politically, and then certain things that aren't. And it's about kind of like what aligns centrally for the space and the process. And for whoever's left out of that, whoever that might be, like that doesn't become something they share. And it might be hard for people to find themselves in that position because, you know, I recently did a book with like an undocumented lead character in it. And that I'm a naturalized citizen. Like that is a reality that is very close to home to me. I think it's incredibly important that those stories be told. How could that personal experience not be political, as Judith Butler would say? I feel my BA bubbling up out of my skin right now. Like, but you know, so it creates these like concentric circles of like, who are we to the public? What titles are we getting? How is the industry operating anyways? And how does that like trickle, you know, down back to us and the titles we're getting? And I'll just end by saying that, you know, Deanna, I think I've already mentioned this joke on the podcast before, but like 2 years ago, You were like, I know there's that one production company that every February they got a book from me. Every February.
I was thinking about that too.
I'm thankful for it.
There
I
you
said
go.
yes.
That's right,
Yes,
buddy.
they
That's
sent
right,
the
buddy.
email and I said yes. I knew it was coming and I was like, thank you.
God bless you.
Yeah.
God bless you, people.
You know what? I mean, the thing is, everything you're saying, yes. What it all comes down to is money. The reason we have to take on the robe of whatever level of celebrity it is because of money.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? We're not really anywhere near like that 70s Renaissance where it was really all about the work for a minute, like stuff that was awful was being done because a story needed to be told. Like that doesn't really exist anymore. And it kind of sort of existed a little bit around 2010s, but disappeared again. Like, so we're just so not in that place. I think for us as artists, creatives, as we're doing these things to fill our soul, we have to remember it's a business.
Mm-hmm.
And so as long as that business aspect is in our mindfulness practice of what we're doing day to day, it makes it a little bit easier to deal with listeners, you know, when they have a certain perspective about something and how we are or are not doing something, whether it's performance or, you know, being available, like doing things in person. We didn't even talk about that, but who can afford it?
Yeah.
Who can afford to do all of the things in person, you know, when our work in this moment requires us to remain alone and available, but essentially alone. So it's all this kind of tailoring to the time of the day without losing yourself and what this work means to you, but still making a living and not only surviving, but finding ways to thrive throughout the daily. It's a lot of stuff to be conscious about.
Because it's all happening regardless of, it's going to happen regardless of whatever your intention or focus on it is. And what you said about business makes me think about how, and has been discussed recently, about how there is nothing that is not political. I think it was Tony Kushner in an introduction to an old edition of a play called The Bright Room Called Day, which is about a bunch of artists living in pre-Nazi Germany, talks about how the idea of non-politics, or like, oh, I'm not political, is a luxury of people who have not had their lives affected by it. And it is a product of a certain, era of time where they're ensconced in a way that they can pretend to be non-political, but that they inherently are. And business is political and politics are business. How you choose to emphasize or navigate them is up to you. And I think with I was saying this last night to someone about like why the audiobook industry has always really had, and this has been true for as long as I've been involved, even though it's expanded and grown a lot, this really great system and feeling of community and parity, as opposed to say theater, which is very communal based as well too, that when you're in a play or something like that, or you're working for a company, you're creating these sometimes temporary, sometimes lasting companies of actors, and you're working together like that. But then that show invariably ends. Theater always ends and then blows into the wind, which is the beautiful thing about theater. But all of us we are our own independent production units, and we are always closing, opening, closing separately, and have that unique experience to share with each other. That continuous cycle of death and rebirth of the book, you know. And so it allows us to be to connect in a way that is unique for for our art form. Now, as we head into this moment and the politics of community and locality become crucial and important, especially when it's happening up there, seems so fucking terrifying. And is more important than ever. It behooves us to just know how political you want to exist, or how much of a business entity you want to practice as, so that you can continue to work, but also so that you can find the right expression for the things that you care about, in a way that we can keep doing it, you know, the way that we won't be prevented from doing it. And finding that, it's in a way like finding that, way of being political that's not that you don't want to seem political, but that just works for you, that works with the genre you're working in, with the books that you're handling, so that we can keep that feeling of parity among all of us, despite the growths and the changes and that are happening to the audiobook industry and how social media and those relationships change, to just like be safe, and productive, and be able to keep doing this work, because it's become, suddenly it's more important than ever. Like the positioning that audiobook has found in this culture didn't exist during the say, I don't know, like the Reagan years, another period of social disaster, right? And upheaval, like and so we have an opportunity to use this position and our entrenchment, whether it's by parasocial relationship or direct relationship, among so many people now, to bring those themes and to bring those ideas and to help stave off, the apocalypse. I mean, I narrate so many books about the apocalypse that it feels like sometimes we're already there.
Feels really, well, maybe we already are, but yeah.
Yeah, you never realize it until like sometimes like, oh yeah, that was the apocalypse back there, and we didn't even realize we were out at the bar.
2012 happened. It's all been a mirage since then.
Exactly. I love that movie.
From all of this, like one reality I feel like I want to throw into the space too is about these like celebrity actors and celebrity casting. That when I think like when I audition for something, I always build my six. So I think about like who else have they probably tried to audition for this title? Like, who else is being considered alongside me? And I think like a reality that we don't acknowledge enough is that like there are a lot of actors all through the ranks who are up for auditions right alongside us. Not only there was one book that came to me and the producer was like, the author said he, didn't want to hear any auditions until like so-and-so celebrity confirmed that they were not available for this book. Right? Like there are sometimes it is that direct. And simultaneously, sometimes like in the same way that like if an everyday narrator goes up for something and we have extremely different styles and we both auditioned and the author picked them, because they liked their voice, they liked their approach, etc. There are people who are, leading Netflix shows, leading whatever, doing things whose agent, an audiobook audition comes on their plate, and they are auditioning right alongside us and being picked, even sometimes when the author doesn't know them as like a celebrity, right? Like they are in the mix among these choices. Especially acknowledging like the reason SAG strike happened, like some people would be leading a Netflix show and then working weekends as a bartender. Like they also are working actors and, need all those things. But simultaneously, like for some publishing companies, production companies, these like celebrity titles are loss leaders. They are expensive productions. They know they are not going to recoup their money on, but it is going to draw attention to their brand externally. It is going to bring these people that have these pre-existing relationships into their portfolio of titles. I think those two things exist alongside the reality and the pain of, your series got picked up for a movie and they're going to re-record the audiobook with the like lead for the movie, or you're like being replaced mid-series with someone of a higher profile because suddenly they're interested in doubling up on the intensity of the reach of this book. I feel like it exists along that reality of like how these companies work in the marketing sense, that sometimes they do know exactly how much money they're going to put into marketing, and they know exactly where that book is going to sit on the top of their sales list. And those things are tied into the search process early on. And sometimes there are these unexpected things that blow up, and we don't always have, even though we kind of are in this industry that asks us to be, we don't always have the attention, the gravitas to bring an audience with us, right? Like I am not at a place in my career where I am bringing an audience with me into a title. There's still plenty of like zero review audible releases for me. And that works for me because I'm going to be paid for those releases anyways. But it does mean that there is a certain degree of like not part of the conversation that I might be in some cases. And I think this conversation is happening in the film and TV world right now with someone's recent interview about how a production a casting director told them that for the entire cast of a TV show, they needed to have a certain number of like social media followers. And so if this big lead leaves social media, they have to cast the following around them. And that's not happening everywhere, but it is happening some places. It impacts indie authors and their choices about who to bring onto their project that they're paying for out of pocket, because they know that this big romance narrator so-and-so is going to bring an audience with them. And so it's not a process I love, especially recognizing that I'm not a narrator who has like access to that power and that movement. You know, I don't necessarily get, unless it's like a returning author I've already worked with, I don't necessarily have authors asking for me to casting directors. And so I think like it just kind of is that part of the industry that we sit into. And it's a reality that hurts. And it's also a reality that's there.
I think at the end of the day, even if it's the harsh reality of like, we are all, whether you're being asked for or not, there's one level of reality where we are all really just entities within a corporate equation.
Right.
And decisions are made all the time about our status or our casting or our whatever marketing does or does not go into the books that we create. And that is a harsh thing to confront when it happens to you when you're cut out for one reason or another. And it's cool to benefit from it, I guess, as well too. But it's also, you're still really subject to the same system that is divorced from you as a human being. I feel like, but that's again, like we were kind of saying before, the reality, what we live under now is not one reality. There are all these different ones, and they're not parallel. They're messy, and it's all over the place. As long as we can identify other planes of reality that we can exist in comfortably with a certain group of people or for ourselves, it doesn't change that corporate entity reality, but it can complement it and find a way through that allows you to find your expression, find your audience or whatever it might be, and not in despite of it, but regardless of it, you know, and maybe alongside it or maybe in spite of it, but it's kind of all we can do, and it's a good thing that we have avenues for those different realities now that we didn't have before. And it's not a desperate move in that respect. It's just you take what you can, you take the tools that you have and you work with it and you do the best you can. And in a way, that's all you have to do. There's sort of like the pressure is released to control the things that, you know, it's very serenity prayer, right? You can, God grant me the serenity to ignore the corporate realities that face me and so on and so forth. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I could extend the rest of that metaphor, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. That I think that's the perfect place for us to finish up this conversation. Thank you for helping us, Neil, like navigate this delicate balance and recognize where we have power and agency and what is beyond our control and what we can put our voices behind. I really appreciate it. And thank you both Deanna and André for being here with us too. Thank you, listeners, viewers, for joining the Narrator Roundtable. If you want to join the conversation, you can find us on social media. You can visit our website, narratorroundtable.com. And you can always submit a question or punch on in to discuss something in the future episode. What's on your mind? We want to hear about it.
Come on. The Narrator Roundtable is produced and hosted by André Santana, Deanna Anthony, Gail Shalan, Kirt Graves, and Lindsey Dorcus. All copyrighted material is shared with permission. Music and sound effects are licensed through Storyblocks Audio. All opinions shared are those of the individuals and do not reflect the positions or policies of any company or organization with which they happen to be associated.